The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining. My name is Ariel Paulides. I'm with Dandas, and today we'll be talking about dashboard versus reports and which one should you go with. Now, to get the things going, just to kick off the beginning of the webinar, I know that there's a few people that always join a little bit late. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to launch a small poll here, just to kind of get your opinion about dashboards and reports before we get started, and hopefully we can maybe compare that to your opinion at the end. So I'm going to launch this poll, and you should be able to see it on your screen right now. And please choose your favorite medium to display information. I do promise to share the results with you at the end of the poll. We'll give it a couple more minutes and we'll get things going. In the meantime, I'm also going to launch my webcam so you can actually see me as well. Okay, I think we're good. We have almost 90% voting. So the 10% left out there that haven't voted yet, please go in and go ahead and cast your vote. And I'll give it 10 more seconds and we'll get going. Okay, good. 95% voting. We're going to close the voting now, and we're going to make this now visible for you guys to see. So here are the results. You can see that 35% of you prefer dashboards, only 13% prefer reports, and the majority of you like both of them equally, which is actually surprising to me. I was expecting to see more leaning towards dashboards. So interesting enough to see that the results coming. Let's see how that changes throughout the webinar as we go along the different examples. Okay, so I'm going to hide this poll again and get things going. So hello again, thank you for joining. My name is Ariel Paulides. I'm with Dandas, and today, as mentioned, we'll be talking about dashboard versus reports. Just a few items before we get started. This webinar is recorded. Like all of our webinars, you will be able to access it through our website. Under the learning section of the website, there is a webinar page. All of our webinars are available there on demand. So if you have to drop off in the middle, or if you want to revisit some of the items that we'll be showing today, you can always access this webinar again. And we'll also make sure to email you a direct link to the webinar recording a few days after this webinar will be completed. So that's one item that we often get questions about, so no worries. You can always access this on demand and even share with others as well. Second point is about questions. Please feel free to jump in at any point, ask your questions. I'll be trying to answer those questions as we progress, but at the same time, most of the questions are harder to answer throughout the flow of the webinar. I will keep note of them and make sure to get to those at the end. There is a questions panel on the GoToWebinar on the bottom right of the GoToWebinar panel. You should be able to access that, post your questions, and I'll try to address as many as possible at the end of the webinar. And if I won't have time to address all of those, I think I will, but if I won't, then I'll definitely make sure that we'll get back to you with an email afterwards with a fully detailed answer to those questions. One last item, if you're using two monitors and you want to kind of use the full space available on your screen, the full real estate of your screen to see what I'll be showing you today, you can detach the webcam area, move it to the other screen, or have it floating over your screen. If you're using a single monitor and you want to maximize the space, you can definitely minimize the space that is being used to show me. If you want to see more of me, you're welcome to maximize that area, but you definitely have the choice. I do recommend, if you have two monitors, to move the webcam to be a bit more floating, so that way you can see more of the content I'll be showing you today. Some of the items will be a bit detailed, so it will be helpful to have more real estate on your screen. Okay, so with that, let's get started. And I know that some of you are new to Damdas, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with a very quick introduction of who we are and what we do. And then from there, we'll obviously dive deeper into how that relates to dashboard and reports. So again, if you are new to Damdas, we offer a BI platform called Damdas BI. It is the most flexible BI and analytics platform. And that flexibility comes from three different factors. First of all, it's the rich end-to-end flexibility of the platform, ranging from data preparation, not only around the ability to connect to data and do simple data preparations, but also advanced complex ETL processes, being able to unify data across different data sources together, and then possibly even warehouse those data models that you'll create, or even push them into our in-memory analytics engine. So a lot of options around the data preparation that allows you, it powers a more advanced data analytics experience, being able to drag and drop and discover data on the fly using smart visualizations, or being able to analyze information period over period with a simple setup or across multiple level hierarchies, and then diving into advanced analytics with formulas, or even your own R and Python scripts and logic that you can easily inject into your data models. Analytics flows right into a data presentation. Obviously, today's webinar will be focusing a lot on dashboard and reports, but all those dashboards and reports are powered by the options to use a very rich library of visualization, all extremely customizable, and then all available directly through our HTML5 designer. So everything that you'll be doing in Damdas BI is available through the web interface, whether you are a developer or a consumer. And we'll be talking about that, the advantage as well. Later on, we'll talk about how you consume dashboard and reports. And finally, the collaboration of those dashboard and reports are those done online, offline, with different tools. Again, I won't be spending a lot of time on the other areas today. It's mostly about dashboard and reports. If you are new to Damdas, there's definitely lots of ways to explore all the capabilities. But today's webinar, we will be focusing mostly on dashboard and reports. I will mention one more thing about the flexibility of the platform. It is rooted not only by the capabilities that goes end-to-end, but also by the customizations, which is available either via built-in properties and options to really control the way you lay out and interact with information, as well as with the fact that everything in the application is powered by open APIs. So the entire user interface I'll be showing you today is available programmatically, both for integration and extension purposes. So a lot of options open up the moment you have the ability to access everything programmatically via the APIs. Now, dashboard and reports, let's talk about that a bit more and focus on how really Damdas views reporting. So our approach to reporting is really to make sure that reporting, which is kind of an all-encompassing name for dashboards and reports, covers not only a subset of the users within your organizations or your customers, but really allow all the users of all skill levels to be able to access the information and data instance they need to make better decisions. That's our approach to a BI analytics. That's why we talk about reinventing reporting. And the way we do it is with that very flexible platform I just mentioned. And the power of that flexibility is really that the platform allows you to adapt to different requirements that obviously change over time. Your business is never static. Being able to change to the way your business needs to move forward is critical, and that's what that flexibility provides. At the same time, we know that the technology alone is not enough. So we have a lot of channels and resources that we use to enable you and make sure that you're successful and you are able to really maximize the value of our technology, our platform. So this webinar is one example for that, but obviously it goes beyond kind of a one-sided interaction, but also with a very personal approach that works with you very closely, for our support team, for our architects, making sure that you know exactly what options are available to you and what possibilities are available around best practices or other ideas that you can leverage to make sure you're making the most out of your investment in the platform in a way that applies to your business effectively. So that's our approach. And I think that's a good segue to today's topic. So reporting. A lot of people use that term interchangeably. Dashboards and reports are definitely a big component of the reporting world. How do we define each? That's what I want to get started with when I approach this topic. So I'm going to start with the dashboard definition. And this one is a dashboard definition that is available in Stephen Few Information Dashboard Design book. If you're not familiar with Stephen Few, he's one of the most known thought leaders in the space of data visualization. He wrote a number of books on the topic. Information Dashboard Design is one of the most popular books when it comes to designing dashboard. Second edition was published in 2013, so a few years back, but still very relevant. A lot of good examples or best practices mentioned in that book. And the definition he used back then in the days was a dashboard is a visual display of the most important information need to achieve one or more objectives that has been consolidated on a single computer screen. And remember that, we'll come to that back in a minute. So it can be monitored at a glance. So that's the definition that Stephen Few used in that book. For many years, I myself used to use that definition as well in many different presentations that I used to give, but not only in presentations, but also in the way I was thinking about dashboards. Now, over the years, I think that definition had to change a little bit, mostly because of technology changes and new trends. So if you look at the Stephen Few's recent publications, he has a blog where he posts different concepts around data visualizations and how to go about it. And in one of the blogs, he posted his most recent definitions that he's using in his workshop. So it's not available in any of these books right now, but it is what he's using in workshops. And what he's saying here is that a dashboard is predominantly a visual information display that people use to rapidly monitor current conditions that require a timely response to fulfill a specific role. So why did he change that definition? And again, I haven't spoke to Stephen about it. I'm not 100% sure, but I have an assumption. I think it's mostly related to changes in technology. So for example, if you look at the second line that people use, why did he make a point of that? Why was that so important to stress? And I think the reason that he made sure that it was there is because of all the change that we've seen recently with AI becoming much more dominant in helping automating different processes, especially when it comes to decision making. And I think it's important to mention that a dashboard is for people to use, because if an entire process is fully automated from the point where data is coming into the system, is being ingested, being analyzed, and a decision and then an action is being taken, then why do we need a dashboard? So I think that's the reason why he stressed that. And to me, it makes a lot of sense. You want to have a dashboard used by people, so you need to think about the way people will be using it. Of course, AI can be part of helping the way people will be making those decisions, but if AI can completely replace the need for a human, then why create a dashboard to begin with? So that's one point. The second point, if you remember on the original definition, he had that statement about a single computer screen display. So he wanted to make sure that all the information is available on a single screen so you can monitor it at a glance. In the new definition, he removed that. So he's not saying anymore that it has to be on a single screen, but it is saying it needs to be rapidly available to monitor the conditions so you can make a timely response. And I think the reason that changed is because back then when he wrote that original definition, dashboards are not really consumed that often on mobile devices. And the way we use mobile devices has also evolved and changed over time. Maybe back then it was a very quick snapshot. And today, when you use and consume information, most of the people actually go and do it directly from the mobile devices, including dashboards as well. So people are much more comfortable with interacting and scrolling and using different mobile gestures to be able to use and consume information from the mobile devices. And that applies to dashboards as well, of course. So I think that definition had to change to comply with the way people consume it on different devices. Maybe that definition is still true if you're designing a dashboard for a laptop or desktop. That's a different discussion. But definitely, you don't have to stick anymore to a single screen display simply because of the way you consume information on different devices. So that's Stevens View, a current definition, and I have to say I quite agree with it. But there is one more definition I want to share with you, and this one is coming from the Big Book of Dashboards, so the authors of the Big Book of Dashboards, and they have used a more generic or broader definition for dashboards. So in their mind, because different people in the industry or not necessarily professional in the industry, but users of dashboards treat dashboards differently or refer to them differently, they had to use a broad definition, and they talk about a dashboard just being a visual display of data that is used to either monitor conditions or facilitate understanding of data. Now, there is a big debate happening online. If you actually follow Stephen Few's blog, you'll be able to read this blog here at the bottom, that link there, and you can see why he doesn't agree with that definition. And then there's a response from the authors of the Big Book of Dashboards why they don't agree with his definition. So it's quite of an interesting debate. You can pick your side. I like the fact that the Stephen Few's definition is a bit more detailed. And that's what he's saying as well. He's saying that it's very important to define something, and the semantics does matter because it helps distinguish what something is. And in my mind, it really helps to better understand what the goal of your dashboard is when you have a better definition in mind of what your dashboard should be. So that's why I like this definition slightly better. But that doesn't mean that I disagree with this definition, which is kind of an all-catch type of definition. At the end of the day, what matters is really that your dashboards are effective. In my mind, better definitions help you to create more effective dashboards. But if you created something that is still effective and you don't know of the definitions, that's still fine. So you can go with the one that you like best. Now, what is a report on the other hand? Report, quite interesting. If you go online and search for reports definition, you won't find too many exact definitions. I think report is also a term that is being used outside of the business intelligence domain or industry. So it's quite generic terms, and therefore there's not a very detailed definition of it like dashboards have definitions. So definition I like to use for reports, and that is, I think, the one that most people will think of when they think of a report, is that a report contains detailed data. It's often displayed in a tabular format, and typically it's using mostly numbers and text in opposed to visual displays of data. Now, again, this is a very broad definitions of reports. What I'm going to try to do now is I'm going to actually go in and go over the differences between reports and dashboards, and hopefully through those differences, it will help you better understand how it relates to a report and how it relates to a dashboard. And I'm not going to touch upon the technology so much at this point. Maybe later on we can talk about how those differences manifest themselves in Danus BI specifically. You will find that different vendors out there are using those terms differently, and in their tools, dashboards and reports not necessarily means the same thing. So what I'm going to try to do here, I'm going to talk about it from more of a use case perspective, functionality perspective, less feature or setup perspective at this point. Later on, we'll touch upon that as well, but for now, I want to help you understand the differences and whether it's implemented in a dashboard or a report, and it's used as a dashboard or user report, that's less important at this point in time. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to start with a couple of differences, show you examples of what that looks like in real life, and then go back to a few more differences and keep on going with that flow. So the first difference, reports as mentioned are primarily used with detailed data. Dashboards, on the other hand, are primarily showing aggregated data. So think of a summarized results of a certain key performance indicator, and from there, a more of a breakthrough or a drill down into the more detailed data. So you may start with a dashboard, interact with it, and drill down and get your report. But the initial display on the dashboard is typically a bit more aggregated versus the detailed display on a report. As mentioned as well, reports are mostly text and table-based. Dashboards are mostly visuals. They're using different visualization techniques to convey data very rapidly, so you can quickly understand the information versus having to read row by row and find patterns and insights that you won't be able to see without good visuals. So let's take a look at that in a real life example. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to bring up an example for a sales dashboard. And you can see this dashboard is quite visual. It's using different types of visualizations, such as an area chart, a line chart, they overlay on top of it. There's a geographical map that is using both colored regions and symbols. There's a stacked bar chart at the bottom, and then next to it, there's another visual that helps me understand density of upcoming meetings for my different salespeople. So a very visual display of the information. And as I mentioned, I can start from that summarized view and then drill down into more detailed information. So for example, here I'm looking at my sales results, and I can very quickly see that there's a big difference between this quarter and the previous year quarter. And it's interesting what happened that there is such big of a gap. So now I can start interacting with my dashboard and right-clicking, for example, on that specific data point, drilling down and seeing the information at the next level. So in this case, I move from the quarterly level to the monthly level. And now I can see additional information, and I can keep on interacting with it. Maybe what I'm doing next is going to even a more detailed view. So I'm going to click on Show Detail, and this will now bring up a very detailed view of the information, and that would be kind of your classic report. So I can see here information across different regions, products, companies, states, and then measurements for those different combinations, total spends, discounts, orders, quantities, and the interactivity here is much more limited. I have the option to maybe filter the information across different products or different dimensions. I can maybe group the information differently by moving columns around. So maybe I want to group it first by the state and then see all the companies under that specific state. I can use a little bit of visualizations here, such as revisualizing a column from being a text column to maybe a data bar column. But ultimately, the type of interactions I have here are much more limited and focused around this very detailed data set. So that's kind of the classic example of what a dashboard is and what a report could look like. And I think that example would resonate with most of you. It's not a groundbreaking example, but just kind of to set the beginning. That said, there are a lot of other types of reports and dashboards, and the definition is a bit broader and a bit different if you look at different use cases. So let's try and look at some of those. So for example, reports, they don't have to be a table. They can also be a layout of different items in a very specific way, often a pixel perfect design. So every element on the report is positioned in a very specific location, which is defined precisely according to your design definitions. Dashboards, on the other hand, are often designed to be using elements in a more of a boxy way, what people like to call. Now, again, this doesn't apply to Dandas BI specifically. In Dandas BI, we offer both a pixel perfect interface for reports and dashboards because we believe that to design better dashboards, you need to have that control. But if you look at many dashboard examples out there, you'll see that a lot of them have that kind of boxy syndrome where each visual is kind of a different box layout on the screen in a different way. That's what most dashboards out there will look like. Reports, on the other hand, will be more pixel perfect oriented. In addition, reports will typically span across multiple pages. Because they're showing very detailed data, there is a need to have more and more real estate, and that's why you'll have more and more pages available on the reports. Dashboard, on the other hand, and if we go back to Stephen Hughes' definition, you try to show the most important information as much as possible without having to search for that data. Therefore, you don't want to have to necessarily start scrolling. And they often are designed in a responsive way. So it adapts to the available screen size and shows as much as possible, and that's the available screen size. The other point is that reports are mostly static, and you saw that in the example I just showed you. There's not too many interactions I can do on the reports. On the other hand, dashboards are highly interactive. And again, I showed that very briefly a moment ago. I could right-click, drill down a certain point, and start interacting with it to get more information. I'll show you a bit more of that in a moment. And one more point to mention is that the way that people consume reports is often in a scheduled way, even offline. So people may get the reports sent to them to their email once a week, once a month, once a quarter, and then maybe from there they even consume it not in the original application, but maybe as an export as a PDF file. Dashboard, on the other hand, are often consumed online in real time because of the need for interacting with the data and drilling down deeper into different data points. That is why dashboards will be often consumed that way. And the data that's shown in it is often more up to date and current versus reports, which are taking more of a snapshot in time. So let's take an example for that one. If I look at a report, here's an example for a very different report than the first one I showed you. But this is a good example for that kind of pixel perfect layout of a certain report. You can see here different elements, a very specific design of how I want to display the information in the report. This is an example for a quarterly report that's being generated and sent out. This is actually from one of our partners. It's a company called Graduate. They provide a software as a service for different universities to be able to better manage their alumni network. So it's a tool that allows the alumni management team within the university, excuse me, to better engage their alumni with their current graduates, obviously around job placement, but around just better networking and better leverage of the alumni network across all of their community. So that's a report they send out on a quarterly basis to their customers, and you can see here it spans across multiple pages, so there is a need to scroll down and see more and more as I go along. And the design of it is very, very specific, almost like an infographic. It's used here to tell a bit more of a story and a snapshot in time of how my alumni network is doing. Now, the other thing I mentioned is that it's usually consumed in a scheduled way offline. Of course, in Dance BI, you can do it with scheduling that, and the way it would look like is typically the schedule will get an export of this report in a PDF. So if I were to export this, you can see that even the way it behaves online and offline is slightly different, simply because of the nature of printing a PDF file. So here, for example, on the PDF, I can see here kind of showing me each page by page. When I want to consume it online, maybe I don't need that breakdown of the different pages, just kind of a scrolling list of the items I have. But when I want to export it and get a pixel perfect print, that is exactly what I get when I go into a PDF export. Now, on the other hand, dashboards, as I mentioned, are designed to be very responsive. So you can see here an example for the same dashboard displayed across multiple devices. And if I have a smartphone, this dashboard will automatically lay out the different elements in this dashboard, the different visuals, one after the other, but I can still use the same interactions that I have available to me on a desktop or laptop. So all the data points are clickable. I can access the menus. Of course, I'm not doing it with a mouse on a mobile device. I'm doing it with my fingers, but the interactions are there. I can do a long tap. I can do a pinch to zoom action. I can do a double tap to zoom. All the available ways that you would use today on any application to interact with the information are available as well when you consume from a mobile device. Same goes with a tablet. You can see here that now I lost that hamburger menu that I had on the mobile device because I have more real estate. I can now even show the different tabs. But again, I'm showing one visual per section because that's what my tablet real estate allows me to do. And if I look at how this dashboard will be displayed on a desktop or a laptop, you can see here now I'm able to actually fit 3 visuals on the same row, and then the next 3 visuals. So I don't need to scroll anymore. Now I can see all of it in a single display. So this dashboard is basically one dashboard that was created in Dance BI, but it's using a responsive mode, so it knows how to adapt to different devices and screen sizes I have available to me on each one of the devices. Now, how is this dashboard more interactive? I can go in here, for example, and beyond the filters and the ability to sort and filter data, I can do things such as maybe right-click a certain visual and access additional data tools. Maybe the ability to go in and analyze my data and use more of those kind of ad hoc data exploration to investigate and better understand my performance. So, for example, here I'm looking at my different manufacturing plants, and I'm looking at the delivery loop cycle. How many minutes it took to deliver from each one of those different plants. Maybe I'll remove the average and I'll add instead the number of deliveries I had for each plant. So I'm going to add a count measure and revisualize this into a different type of visualization. And you can see here DynaSPI recommends different types of visualization that may work with this data set. You can obviously choose any other type of visual. The list is very long, but it also recommends for you the most appropriate visualization for this set. In this case, I'm going to use a tree map, for example, and it's going to use color and size of rectangles for each one of those plants to better help me better understand which one of those plants performs the best across those two different measures. And I can further segment that. For example, I can say, well, let's break it down by division. So I'm going to drag and drop the division onto my column section. And now you can see my tree map is breaking it down into the rural division and the city division. And now I can see the different plants in each one of those. And the bigger the plant is, the longer it takes in minutes to deliver, to have my delivery loop. And the darker the color is, the more deliveries I had for that plant. So you can see here, for example, this plant had only 5 deliveries, but the delivery loop cycle for those was actually, the sum of it was actually quite long, versus this plant that had more deliveries, in this case 7 deliveries, but had a much smaller delivery time, which is obviously better. So maybe that's a point for me to investigate. How come Patty is taking that much longer than the Nagold plant? So if I go back to my dashboard now, just by clicking on back to dashboard, I can now collaborate with my colleagues and maybe share those insights online. So I can right-click this data point here and add a note and say, this is higher than other plants. Why is that? And then that question will show up, and then someone else, one of the analysts, maybe that they is familiar with that plant operation, or maybe someone else that goes in and further analyzes the data, can actually come in here and reply to me, and we can have a full discussions happening online about this specific data point performance. So as you can see in this case, the dashboard is much more interactive than the report, because it allows me to explore, analyze, and do what people often refer to as ad hoc reporting. So the ad hoc reporting concept, unlike reports, is when you go and create your own report on the fly. Now, with the improvement in technologies, this ad hoc reporting process is no longer just a dragging and dropping different measures and dimensions and getting a table, but it's actually done in a very visual way, as I just demonstrated. But it's still really the process of being able to self-serve and being able to answer questions just by interacting with the data myself without having a report or a dashboard predefined for me. And that's exactly what I just demonstrated with this Analyze Data Tool option that I have here in DynaSPI. Okay, so going back to the differences, we talked about the multi-pages, static, often consumed in a scheduled way offline with PDFs, for example, versus dashboards which are responsive to the screen size, highly interactive, and consumed in real time. One more important difference between reports and dashboard is the complexity they require, and that would typically be true to most tools out there. If you're setting up a report, typically it requires a bit more time, both because the design is a bit more complex. You usually go with a pixel perfect design, and there's more consideration to take into that when you do a pixel perfect design, but also usually there's a bit more skills required to better understand how the reports will behave and work. Dashboards, on the other hand, are usually easier to create with minimal training, sometimes even with no training at all. Users can start and create a dashboard. So let me give you an example of what that looks like in DynaSPI, so you can better relate to that difference and understand what I'm talking about. So I'm going to go back into DynaSPI here, and I'm going to create a new dashboard. So I'm going to open our menu on the left here, create a new dashboard. And here I have the option to either choose from an existing template or just create a blank dashboard. I'll start with creating a blank dashboard. And what you can see here is an interface, a designer interface, which is very much like a PowerPoint design interface. So if you're comfortable creating slides in PowerPoint, it's actually quite similar to design a dashboard in DynaSPI at least. So how does that look like? How does that work? So the first thing to do is to bring data. So for example, here I have some local data on my desktop. I have my sales by country and time for a certain time period. I can just drag and drop that Excel file onto my dashboard canvas and start laying it out and designing it the way I want to. So for example, here I can decide that I want to focus on my different countries. So I'm just going to move some of my dimensions into the filter or the slicer section. And again, use the revisualize option to choose the most appropriate visualization for this data. I'm going to use, in this case, a map visualization to demonstrate this geographical data. And I can keep on designing this just using drag and drop actions. So if I go into my explore section of my dashboard, I can either explore existing data sources and bring data from those data sources onto my canvas, or I can use predefined metrics that were created for me by someone else. Maybe there's a library of metrics. I'm just going to drag and drop those visualization right in here and bring those into my canvas. Excuse me. So just dragging and dropping a couple of existing metrics. As I drag and drop them, you can see those different alignment lines helping me to lay out the information, display it exactly the way I want to. I can maybe bring in a number of filters onto my dashboard, lay them out exactly where I want to position them. There's even a smart option here that allows me to very quickly generate those filters and create a dashboard in just a few clicks, really. There's not too much work I need to do here. Again, similar to PowerPoint, I can go in, arrange different items, distribute them maybe equally or position them in a certain location, add different components, maybe a label here. I'm going to place this label on the top right-hand side. I'm going to call this my dashboard. I can access the properties of these labels, the text, maybe change the font size of this label. And very quickly you can see here I've created a dashboard just by dragging and dropping, clicking in a few areas and creating a layout, which is not very sophisticated in this example, but very simple and easy to do. Now, the fact that it's simple and easy to do doesn't mean that you can create great dashboards, but it definitely allows almost anyone to generate dashboards and content without being overly technical. So that's the process of creating a dashboard. On the other hand, if I wanted to create a report, I'm going to go again into my new menu here and create a report. The report canvas designer is a bit different, simply because of the nature of reports, because they need to span across multiple pages. The report will have a different structure. So each report will have a page header and a report header. Again, think about the fact that a report could span across multiple pages. So you may want to have a header that shows just the beginning of your report and then the end of the report, and then a header that starts again in every page. Maybe the page number and the number of pages, the total pages should show on each page, but then the title of your report should only be on the first page, and then you want to have a summary in your report further. So I can modify that, and that will be similar to the way I'll be doing it in dashboards. Again, I can access properties, change the size of this label, and so on. But then from here on, everything is quite different, because in a report there is that concept that my data will repeat itself across a certain dimension or a certain category I have in my data. And that will basically what will allow me to span across multiple pages. So that is kind of a shift in concept or design in mindset that you need to have when you go about creating your report. So here, the same data set I'm going to use, just my sales by country, but I'm going to work with it slightly differently. So I'm going to open that data set. I have the same data. And what I'm going to decide here first is which data point I want to use to repeat my data by in the report. So in this case, I'm going to do a monthly report. Just going to drag and drop that into this area here. And now this will generate a section for me that represent the body of this area in the report. And I can have multiple body areas. It doesn't have to be a limit to one. I can also have child bodies areas. So it can get quite complex, but in the simple case, I'm going to have a header, a body, and a footer for that area. When my header is going to be the date, and then each one of the rows will be that specific month that I have in my data set. I'm going to bring here more information, the sales amount, for example, and then I'm going to decide that I want to visualize that not just with a tablet display, but also with other visualization. And that's maybe one of the differences that the Dynalysis BI reports component offers comparing to many other traditional reporting tools out there, which are mostly table-based. In Dynalysis BI, you really have the option to use any visualization that you can use on a dashboard in a report as well. So I'm going to go into my data visualization menu here, and I'm going to choose a bar chart to be part of my report. I'm going to position it where I want it. and again, just drag and drop data on it. I'm going to choose to have my measures, and I'm going to break it down by the different continents. So once I do that, you can see that the report designer, the dashboard designer I was showing you earlier, was pretty much what you see is what you get. I don't need to necessarily switch between my edit mode and the view mode to see how my dashboard will look like. On a report, because the report needs to generate itself for the repeating dimensions that you use for the repeating category, in this case, the months, I don't have the same view I would get on the final report. I have to go from edit view from edit mode to view mode to see what this report will look like with my data. So that's what I'm going to do now. I'm going to click on the view button on the top left-hand side, and this will now generate my report. And you can see now for each one of the months, I'm getting the sales amount and then the distribution of that sale across those sales across the different continents. And you can see I can scroll down. Doesn't matter how many pages I will need to fit all that content, the report will automatically generate that for me. If this was a dashboard, it would be very hard for me to know exactly how many pages I would need in advance and what's the height of the dashboard and so on. So that's the beauty of the report. It knows automatically to scale this content across multiple pages as needed based on the current data set I have available. So just going back to the editing mode again, you can see the designer here is not very hard to use in the sense that I need to script or do something like that. I can still use drag and drop, but it's not a what you see is what you get experience. It's more of a concept of I need to know what I'm repeating by, and there's a bit more thinking to do when I'm laying out the information and want to create a pixel perfect report that's going to be shared with many different users. Okay, going back to our differences, the last important difference to stress is who would be the target audience. And I would say reports are mostly for two types of user groups. One would be data crunchers. So think of maybe an accountant that wants to review a very detailed row by row report. This would be more of the first type of report I've showed you earlier, kind of a tableau display of data. Or the other hand could be an executive, someone that is viewing an overview of a report such as the one I showed you afterwards with the alumni quarterly report that was sent once a month. Dashboards, on the other hand, are really for all type of users, ranging from the data crunchers all the way to the executive, but also offering a lot of room for the analysts in between to come in and interact and play with the data and explore further to answer more questions. So really, dashboard spans all the types of users out there, not just the data crunchers or the executives. So the biggest question is, of course, after that we've covered all those differences between reports and dashboards, which one should you use? And the answer is, of course, it depends. But before I give you that generic answer of it depends, I want to stress one more thing. I want to say that if you're not sure which one you want to use, if you're not sure if a report or a dashboard is the way to go, then probably dashboard is the way to go. Reports are really starting to become really specific in the type of use cases they fill. For the most part, dashboards will do almost all the same elements you have in reports, and on top of that, offer the interactivity, access to a more accurate data, up-to-date data, as well as the option to further explore and answer more options by collaborating with other people online versus offline, which is always a bit more delayed. So for the most part, I would say your way to go is dashboards, but there are still good use cases for reports. And I think that's why it was important for us in Danfoss BI to include not just the dashboard scalability, but reports as well. You can see that many modern tools these days only offer the dashboard components, and the reports basically are just a table that could be in the dashboard. But as you just saw, report is not always a table, and that doesn't really comply with all the report use cases. So let's go over some of those cases where reports are still the way to go, and that will hopefully help you understand when you should choose a report versus a dashboard. So the first use case is that your audience is looking for a data story versus data exploration. Now, what is a data story? Think of a data story as a way to convey the information to a group of users in a very quick fashion. So, for example, if you're a CEO and you have a need for the key results in order to present that to the board members, maybe reports such as the alumni report I showed you earlier that's a great way to do that versus providing them a dashboard. Now, again, it doesn't mean that dashboards are not capable of telling a story, but I would say that typically dashboards are there to help you monitor and analyze quickly, but not necessarily get that snapshot that you would need for telling a story. The alumni report I showed you earlier does a better job at that. Now, how do I use a dashboard to tell a story? Typically, what I do is I go in Dynamics BI and I create a new slideshow, and that slideshow is a combination of dashboards together. Each one of the dashboard is telling a different element. Maybe some of those are just a single visual and not a combination of visuals on the dashboard. But ultimately, they are there and helpful to share more of a story than just a single dashboard. So again, if you want to tell a story, especially if it's done offline versus offline, reports are a good option to use. And again, this is a great example for those. There's a very good story here in terms of understanding what are the key statistics we have, how many users are active, how many are willing to help, ambassadors, and then our growth and how much are we driving engagement with our alumni network. All of those details that are important for my stories are readily available and easily consumable in this pixel perfect layout versus a dashboard where I'm more inclined to analyze data versus tell that story. The second use case is around the need to access a periodical snapshot of the data. So think of yourself when you get your monthly electricity or a water consumption bill. Maybe it's a monthly or quarterly, depending on where you live in the world. That report is available to you on that periodical schedule, and it just gives you a snapshot of that point in time, usually comparing it to maybe what you were doing in the previous year or previous period in time, previous month, previous quarter. That type of a report is all you need. You don't really need the access to the daily level information or down to the minute level, hour performance. You're not going to change your behavior based on that, but you really want to look for the pattern or the trend of your behavior over a longer period of time, simply because of the nature of your consumption. That said, a dashboard could also fulfill that case, but still, because you're trying to provide a snapshot of the data and not an up-to-date update, then usually report will do a better job of conveying that information, usually with more text versus what you'll see on a dashboard. That will be a good use case for reports. Now, the exception to that would be how do you make sure that because you have that monthly or quarterly or weekly cadence, you don't miss important changes in your data in between. And that is where the functionality of being able to come in and schedule some notifications can help you catch those as well. So I would say, even if you're getting a periodical, a monthly update, could be even quarterly, you want to make sure that you're not missing any important changes within that month or quarter. So for example, I'll give you a real life use case. When I was traveling on vacation for a 2 weeks vacation, I actually had a pipe bursting in my basement, and a flood started. Now, I wouldn't know about this flood if I didn't have a notification telling me about an unusual water consumption in my house. So that would be typically done in Dynamics BI using what we call data-driven notifications. And what you can do here is you can basically add a condition that will monitor a certain measurement. So you can say if my value increases or continuously increases or decreases, if it enters a different a certain state, such as a condition against a certain threshold, in that case, that's where I want to be notified via email or using a different method. But basically, that's when I want to get that alert sent to me. This will be very helpful where I have those reports which are on periodical data, and for the most part, I don't need a daily update on the status, but still, I don't want to miss important changes on my data in case I need to respond to those quickly. The third use case is around the need to access raw data, which is often printed or offline, versus a summarized data set. The example for that would be the finance team now reviewing the sales transaction that you have row by row for a certain audit. I'll give you an example of how that could look like in a report created in Dynamics BI. So this is a sales order report, so I can see the different order numbers. And for each one of the orders, I can see the salesperson associated with it, where that sale took place. And I can see the detailed line items within that sale. So I can see each one of the products, what was the quantity sold for it, the discount. And I can now review this, say, offline. You can imagine the finance team going over this with a marker, kind of crossing off lines in a certain audit or something like that. Of course, there's more automated ways to do those type of audits these days. But basically, this is the way that people would usually prefer to consume a very detailed set of data. Now, the last use case is when your content needs to be repeated across an unknown number of pages. And again, you may be designing a data display where you don't know exactly how much data is going to come back for the user selection. I'll give you an example. You are on a website looking for flights relevant for a certain period in time, and your date ranges are maybe changing all the time. Maybe your criteria, maybe you want to have direct flights versus multiple stop flights. Maybe you're looking for hotels and you have different criteria for those hotels. So that listing that comes back for your different selections may or may not need multiple pages. I'll show you again an example for that. Here's an example for a report that spans across multiple pages based on the number of hotel listings that comes back for your criteria selection. So again, if you were to design this in a dashboard, the best you could probably do is design this in a table, and then you lose a lot of the visual elements, or you create a very lengthy dashboard to begin with, and in many cases, all that length and scrolling is not required, or maybe in some cases it's not enough to fit all your visuals. On a report, on the other hand, because of that nature of repeating the content, you can definitely cover all the different use cases dynamically based on how much data will be relevant to the user selection. So that is the fourth use case for when I would recommend using reports. Hopefully that helps to kind of set the expectations of when you want to use reports and when you want to use dashboards. So with that, I want to basically open up the floor to questions. Just before I do that, I do want to say if you like what you saw and you're new to Dundas and you want to try creating dashboards and report yourself, you can definitely do so online right now, or download the product and connect it to your own data sources. That's definitely an option as well to try and experience those different types of visualizations. Or you can talk to us and get a personalized demo on your specific data cases, on your specific requirements, and we can try and help you understand what your dashboard and reports could look like. So with that, let's open up to some questions. We have a few minutes remaining. I'll try to answer as many questions as possible in the remaining time. Let me bring up the questions panel here. Okay, so there's a question here about the usage for the report footer area, and the question is that the place to insert logos, timestamp, standard company strings and disclaimers? And the answer is yes, absolutely. That's the best place to include that type of information. A very good example for when that should be used. Okay, so there's a question here about the usage of tables versus defining reports. And I guess that question relates specifically to the way you would do it in Dynamics BI. Again, many tools out there just offer a table, and that would be considered the reporting option. There's no real object for reporting. And I would say if your data doesn't require too many specialized visualization to express it, but it has to repeat across a certain combination, then tables are probably a good way to go about it. But if your data needs additional visualizations in it, which cannot be done in a table, but it does repeat across different elements, and again, I'm going to go back to that same example I just used. In this case, I have both a data image showing me the salesperson, I have a map of where the sale took place. So I don't have just a table. I also have kind of a different display for each one of those categories. In this case, a report will probably make more sense than using a table in Dynamics BI at least. So That is kind of the rule of thumb I would use in terms of when to use a table, when to use a report object in Dynamics BI. It is important to mention, and I forgot to mention that earlier, reports and scorecard, which is a kind of a mini report, can both be integrated into dashboard. So you can even have a dashboard with a report section in it in case you need to repeat information but show it in the same interface. So that's an option as well. Okay, so there's a question here about the performance differences between rendering a report and a dashboard. The answer is there are performance differences between rendering a report and dashboard, typically because reports usually span across more pages. So there's more information that typically is displayed in a report. If your report is something that's going to show on a single page similar to a dashboard for the most part, then I would say usually there's not, you won't notice performance differences in terms of loading time. It will be pretty equivalent. But in many cases, your report could span across 10, 15, even 100 pages. In those cases, of course, it will take more time to render a report. And that's why also they're often being consumed offline on a scheduled weekly export or monthly export. And in that case, because it's done offline, the rendering time doesn't matter so much. People get the export of the report in their inbox once a week, once a month, and they just open a predefined result. So yes, if your report goes across more than a few pages, you will notice a longer loading time, but you shouldn't notice a big difference if they're using to show the same amount of data. Okay, there's a question here saying in version 1 of Dynamics BI was possible to create a report out of dashboards. Why did that change? I don't think it has changed. I'm not sure exactly. We'll probably need to take that one offline, but you can still drag a dashboard onto a report. That's actually a common practice if you wanted to combine multiple dashboards and create a single export. You can do that using reports. So you can definitely drag a dashboard onto a report and have that. We have even support documentation, even a webinar showcasing that. It's called the reporting webinar. So if you go and watch that webinar, you'll see a nice video showcasing that on version 4 of Dynamics BI, how you can create a report out of multiple dashboards. So that's definitely still an option. Okay, the question here about how large, in terms of number of pages, can be a report built in Dynamics BI. The answer is it depends. There's no real there's no limitation. Dynamics BI will not limit you to 100 pages and that's it. You can actually go above that, but you have to take into consideration that the more pages the report will need to generate and the more graphics that will be involved in that report, then the longer it will take to render. Now again, it doesn't matter as much if you do it offline on a schedule, but if you distribute it to a lot of different types of users and each one of the reports is dedicated to that user, meaning that it's showing different data based on the user's data permissions or data preferences, in that case, each one of those reports will need to be rendered separately. And if that report takes a lot of time to render, then you're adding more performance strain on your Dynamics BI server. Now again, Dynamics BI handles that nicely. There's a queuing mechanism, and it will only render a few reports at a time. So it will make sure that that thing doesn't consume all the resources of your server, but it will still take longer to render because of the length of the report. So there's no real limitation, but it is a balance in terms of how much or how quickly you want the reports to be rendered. So the question here, can we print a report on an A4 size versus a letter? And the answer is yes. When you export to PDF and when you design reports, you can design them to different dimensions. And you can export to different dimensions as well, A4, A3. It's not just A4 and letters. So yeah, definitely you can do different styling of layouts. Okay. I answered as many questions as I could in the time that we had available to us. For those who I didn't have time to answer your questions, I will get back to you. We will get back to you with an email afterwards. I do want to thank you again for joining our webinar. Hopefully it was a good way to understand when to use reports and what are the differences between reports and dashboards. And I look forward to see you again in our next webinar. Thank you, and bye-bye for now.